the government keeps spoon-feeding us these narratives that ultimately prove to be false. It's not the left or the right. It's people on both sides have completely lost confidence in the institutions that govern this country, whether it's the media, whether it's the government, whether it's corporate elites. So what you have are the people that are in charge leading you to believe we're doing something for a particular reason when in reality, there's something else going on. So, well, welcome back. How are you going to do this?
Welcome back. This is Pierre Rausini. We're going to be talking about the new Generation Cartel.
Unlike the other cartels, which are your conventional drug trafficking organizations, the Jalisco New Generation has transformed itself into something more akin to a traditional organized crime family. And as we'll discuss later on, it's created a circumstance in Mexico that is completely unprecedented. And in certainly my estimation, and I'm sure the estimation of others, this is the particular group that's going to cause the American government to finally have to intervene, because their conduct is just simply beyond the pale at this point. In fact, just a couple of days ago, the FBI, along with the U.S. Treasury Department, issued a notice concerning the New Generation's real estate scams that they've now implemented. The Jalisco Cartel is targeting U.S. owners of timeshares. And in just the preceding 2 years, they've gotten over $300 million they've defrauded American citizens out of. Just 6,000 documented cases. Well, these aren't individuals.
6,000?
6,000. Like, it's one thing for you to be involved in drug trafficking. Okay, it is what it is.
Right.
Because the people on the American side are generally other drug traffickers doing business with the Mexican nationals.
Right.
They're choosing to do business with them. This is targeting innocent Americans. These are guys just sitting at home, getting a call from a phony lawyer who's saying, "Hey, we got an interested party that want to buy your timeshare.
Right.
You got 80,000 tied up in it. They're offering you 140,000, and they end up just, we'll discuss the actual intricacies of the scam later on. But it's just, you've seen a transformation from traditional drug trafficking activity to something that full-blown Mexico has never seen before. And quite frankly, the United States has never seen before. At its peak.
I was going to say, what about with the Italian mob? Nothing like this?
Peak, the Gambinos had maybe a couple thousand people between main members and associates.
Right.
Collectively, there may have been 5,000 or 6,000 people in the entire country involved in that particular sphere of activity. In Mexico, the New Generation's got 45,000 members. So it's orders of magnitude greater in a context where they have freedom to move.
I was going to say, and carte blanche to do what they want to do.
So
because
yes, and so you've got a threat that is present south of the border that has never existed before.
All right, so where are we starting?
Well, how would you like to begin? Would you like a little background on?
I would like a little back. Do we have background?
We have a little bit of background for you. Okay.
Excellent.
Look, the Jalisco Cartel, notorious for its violent tactics, has become Mexico's most influential drug cartel. Although it's second in size.
Second to who?
Sinaloa.
Okay.
Which are its principal rivals. It has become the most powerful. And the cartel has accumulated power in two ways. One, they've branched out into what is traditionally characterized as organized crime-related activities. See, for a number of years, the American government has always characterized Mexican drug cartels as being organized crime. And on a superficial level, that'd be accurate because they are criminals and it is organized.
But it's specific.
Yeah, well, organized crime is a term of art legally.
Right.
And what it generally represents are those type of organizations, principally ethnic, whether it's the Italians, the Israelis, the Chinese, the Russians, who are engaged in racketeering activity, whether it's illegal bookmaking, loan sharking, extortion, prostitution, various species of fraud. Mm-hmm. All of these are characterized as rackets, and any one of them legally are characterized as predicate acts. So if you were charged under a RICO prosecution, they just have to prove three predicate acts for you to be found guilty. And so that framework doesn't generally apply in the drug trafficking context. Well, now it does, because what the new generation has done has migrated into this particular sphere. And so in order to understand its background, as we previously discussed, Sinaloa had its golden era from, let's say, 2004 to 2010.
Okay.
And at this point, you're talking an organization that the government has accurately characterized as the largest and most powerful drug syndicate in the history of the world. They operated on a level not seen since the British Empire back in the 17th, 18th, to 19th centuries.
All right.
And so,
what is the British Empire? How does that relate to a
drug trafficking operation?
Drug trafficking.
They're the largest opium traffickers in the history of the world.
Like the Opium Wars, and that they were moving opium. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yes, the fortune of the King of England's fortune is built on the back of heroin trafficking. And so that's why they had to keep India
behind
and Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Because Hong Kong was the segue into southern China. And so, the British Empire was responsible for creating tens of millions of heroin and opium addicts. And so that, of course, was state-sponsored trafficking activity.
They seem so polished, though.
Yeah, but, those are usually the guys you got to watch out for. Whereas Sinaloa now, a couple centuries later,
right,
we're essentially able to replicate something not as massive, but not sanctioned.
Right.
And so you saw an operation that, from the American perspective, was obviously enormous. Well, the Sinaloa cartel is not a single organization. It constitutes a federation of, at that time, let's say 40 different organizations spread out over 27 states.
Right.
And so what made Sinaloa different...
Mexican states.
Okay.
I'm just saying, not everybody knows that Mexico is made up of states.
Yes, it's the United States of Mexico. And so you have a horizontal leadership structure that was essentially based on how the Romans configured their organizations after Julius Caesar betrayed the Republic. When he took over, he was essentially dictator, but he characterized himself as first amongst equals.
It's funny you mentioned that because Colby and I were actually discussing that yesterday.
Okay, well...
Julius Caesar and the whole thing.
Okay,
I know, I'm joking. Go.
Well, the whole point is, Julius Caesar, then he gets killed. Augustus, well, he's the first who adopts that name, first amongst equals. That's his title. It's the same model that the Catholic Church adopted. You see all the bishops, they're all equal. The Pope is first amongst equals.
First amongst, that seems like that doesn't make sense. It's first, so we're all equal, but I'm first.
Yeah, but he's nominally in charge.
Okay.
Because when you look, if you've got an organization that spans 27 states, well, let's put it in the American context. If you've got a group in Los Angeles, a separate group in San Francisco, a group in Seattle, a group in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Denver. Well, the guys in Denver got nothing to do with the guys in LA.
Right.
It's not the same organization. These are independent organizations. They operate completely autonomously.
But they're all kind of listening to somebody.
No, they're not listening to anybody. They're all connected. They're nodes on an independent network.
Okay.
And so the alpha node's got nothing to do with the Charlie node, but they both share the Bravo node.
Okay.
And so the group that nominally is in charge are the ones who can provide the protection. And so the first amongst equals in the Sinaloa context, for instance, is its leader, Miles Zambada.
Right.
He's not in, he's in Sinaloa. He's not controlling the guys in Sonora.
Right. Okay.
But he's providing political protection. Meanwhile, the guys in Sonora have access to the border crossings in Nogales. So they're saying, hey, we'll handle the border crossings.
Right.
And he's saying, I'll handle the politicians. Meanwhile, the guys in Colima are saying, well, we'll handle the port.
Right.
And so what you have is a collection of organizations
working together,
none of them taking orders from central command, all of them completely autonomous, which is why it's so resilient. We're now 35 years into the Sinaloa cartel's existence. And you can't attack it. It's like attacking water.
Right.
It's like, you ever watch a flock of birds flying?
Mm-hmm.
They all move in unison, but there's no one directing their movements.
Right.
It's an emergent property. And so that's what essentially you have here. And you have to look no further than 2017. For years, for 2 decades, the government characterized, Joaquin Guzman, Chapo, as the leader of the cartel.
Yeah, they take him out.
They brought him to New York. He's in New York as of January 2017. And what happened? More drugs in LA, more drugs in the U.S. in 17 than in 16. More in 18 than in 17. More, it actually just got worse.
Right.
You've got a higher level of fatalities, more amount of product. So what's that tell you?
It didn't change a thing.
That he was never in charge.
Right.
It was all bullshit.
Okay.
See, and we can discuss this later on if you'd like to, the fundamental problem with our society, and I have an interesting perspective because when I got charged with the federal drug kingpin prosecution, it was 1997. So I leave society. I don't come back until 2023. It's a totally different world.
Right.
Like people out here now have just lost their effing minds.
Right. Right.
And I believe the primary issue, and it's not a political thing, it's not the left or the right, it's people on both sides have completely lost confidence in the institutions that govern this country. Whether it's the media, whether it's the government, whether it's corporate elites, nobody's trusting nobody.
Right.
And what happens is, for the last 3 to 4 decades, the government keeps spoon feeding us these narratives that ultimately prove to be false. Chapo Guzman's the bad guy. Bad.
Right.
You arrest him, you get more product the next year. So you're full of shit the whole time, man.
Right. What did you accomplish by doing that? Right.
Or,
it couldn't have been true. What you were saying.
What you're saying couldn't have been true. And this is what's caused the political divide in our country today. So 3 decades ago, you and I were, we were in our 20s back in the 90s. What was the big phrase you would hear for years? The rising tide lifts all boats.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was the premise from which NAFTA was approved.
Right.
Well, anybody with any critical thinking skills would have immediately recognized that, hold on a second, this is total bullshit. How can shipping a factory from Ohio to Mexico help that community in Ohio?
Right.
Or help that worker in Pennsylvania?
Right.
And so what we've had is decades of these narratives which are ultimately false. One of which is, of course, the Joaquin Guzman. Another one is, a rising tide lifts all boats. Another one, the whole drug war, we're gonna disrupt the drug markets by attacking supply. That's total bullshit. Markets are not a function of supply, and they never are. They're a function of demand.
If you sleep hot at night, you know how disruptive that can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all of the above. That's where GhostBed can help. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, cooling pillows, and cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts to your body's temperature, every Ghost Bed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips, or a firm option with exceptional support, your Ghost Bed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a Ghost Bed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out your mattress for 101 nights, risk-free, to make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping, and most items are shipped within 24 hours. If you're not sure which Ghost Bed is right for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions and get a personalized recommendation. Even better, our listeners can get 50% off site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/Cox and use the code COX at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/Cox with the code COX at the checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide.
So what you have are the people that are in charge leading you to believe we're doing something for a particular reason, when in reality, there's something else going on. And so that's why, with respect to Sinaloa, when you removed Guzman, it actually got stronger.
Right.
The drug problem actually got worse. And so that model is very effective, but it's also like herding cats. You're not going to be able to work in unison, and it allows for masses of material, but it doesn't really allow for concentrations of power, because for concentrations of power, you need a unified central command.
Right.
That's what the new generation is.
Okay.
See, the new generation is on a totally different model. It's vertically integrated. It's hierarchical in nature. Everything stems from Mencho. So while Sinaloa may have 27 organizations, the new generation is less manpower with 37 organizations. But everybody's operating on the franchise model. So if you open up a McDonald's, you can't change the ingredients in a Big Mac.
Right.
That's why they're able to concentrate force in a manner the other organizations simply aren't. And that's why they're able to create this enormous portfolio of criminal activity that none of the other groups have been able to replicate.
Doesn't that make it more susceptible to disruption?
That's where ultimately we're going to get to, is the new generation is less resilient, because at this point it's essentially a cult of personality. Everything is centered around Mencho. And so a decapitation strike on a vertically integrated network is actually effective in that it's going to disrupt the network. It doesn't disrupt Sinaloa.
Right.
They just morph into a new blob.
Right.
See, but we know now the downside, of course, there's always trade-offs. If you were to take out Mencho, what happens? It fragments.
Right.
And that was the point that we were about to get into, because when Sinaloa was at its peak, the third most powerful drug lord in Mexico was an individual named Nacho Coronel. Well, he was responsible for overseeing the Mexican state of Jalisco. He operated out of Guadalajara. Well, his business associate was a guy named Oscar Valencia, known as El Lobo.
Okay.
So in 2009, Lobo gets knocked off. In 2010, Nacho Coronel gets killed. The Mexican military services went to apprehend Coronel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they couldn't take him alive.
Right.
Because he knows too much concerning political stuff. The guy lived in the same house for 10 years. How could you be looking for him? You want to know where he's at? He's on that cul-de-sac, third house from the corner.
Right.
So when they finally made the decision to move on him, they sent 100 guys.
Yeah.
And made sure they didn't take him into custody. Well, that action, although hailed as a victory by the American law enforcement community, actually set in motion a chain of events that created the new generation. Because when Nacho Coronel was in charge, and I'm sure he wasn't, Mr. Friendly,
mm-hmm.
but on the other hand, he's the guy who was able to keep all these other maniacs when he had he had his foot on their necks.
Right.
There's a whole field of Menchos
ready
to spring into action once you remove, the adult supervision.
Right.
And that's a lesson that we still haven't learned, because they're going for the headlines. And so when Nacho Coronel got taken out of the picture, now you had the Coronel family who are blaming Sinaloa,
right.
Whether it was Beltran-Leyva, whether it was Guzman. They're just saying, hey, look, you guys crossed us. They
remove themselves
from the equation. Meanwhile, the Valencia organization, known as the Millennial Group, they're in the middle of a squabble. The faction that prevails is the one led by Mencho. So now Mencho and his organization, known as Torcidos, joined forces with Coronel's old organization, called themselves the New Generation. So then at this point, they're still within the Sinaloa framework. Now they decide, no, we're going to leave. So now they leave Sinaloa. They form their own cartel. Well, initially, there was a working relationship between the two groups. Then, of course, they start fighting for territory. They start fighting for assets. They want to secure their position. Once they do so, they maintain a working relationship for them for a number of years. Well, so long as the American law enforcement community was distracted chasing Chapo, it allowed for the new generation to just grow.
Right.
And at that point, it's strictly just a drug trafficking syndicate. And so up until about 2015, you never really heard about them. You had to be in the know. Like in prison, you get new guys showing up. And so, I'm Latino, so I knew some of the guys, and I talked to the new arrivals, and they got new stuff, new guys down there, new operation, a new group. And it's just like, okay, let's limit it to Jalisco.
Right.
And then like a couple years later, it was Jalisco, Colima, and Nayarit. And then now it's Michoacan. It's like, how are they spreading like this?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you're seeing this group start to metastasize. And then in 2015, you had their coming out party when the Mexican government tried to apprehend Mencho. That's when, they ambushed a bunch of Mexican military personnel. They shot helicopters out of the sky. They created enormous
chaos
in Guadalajara. They were able to get the guy out of the picture. And so, Mencho became public enemy number one until Chapo escaped from prison. Like, he keeps catching these breaks.
Right. Not now, but yeah.
Not now, but, so then when Chapo escaped, now everything went back to him. So that gave Mencho a little bit of breathing room. And so when Guzman gets knocked off again in 16, and this time extradited to the United States in 17, that's when the situation in Mexico genuinely became a threat to the United States. Up until that point, and you can say for the first 25 years of cartel activity, it was just drug traffickers being drug traffickers.
Right.
They didn't force anybody to buy their product. Nobody had to do it, and you chose to do it, and then it was available.
Yeah, there's a demand.
There's a demand. The new generation created a different paradigm because they were a militarized group. They demonstrated the capacity to fight the military. They demonstrated the capacity to knock down aircraft. And so from the American law enforcement perspective, like this group is now on the radar. Well, the reason why they became so potent is because they had control of the two main ports on the Pacific coast, which allowed them to import all the precursors. They had the former Coronel network of super labs. You know, Coronel was known as the king of crystal.
Right.
Well, he's the one who industrialized the production. Well, you already had all these labs in place. The Chinese started sending the precursors for, the Fentanyl.
Right.
That's what changed the dynamic. Because once you introduce the Fentanyl into the equation, it resulted in orders of magnitudes more profits. For the first 25 years, the premise underlying the operations in Mexico across all cartels was you make your money in volume.
Right.
Sinaloa became biggest because they were making less money per unit. They just sold a hell of a lot more units. Well, it was actually forbidden for you to adulterate the material, diluting its quality, and then on top of that, lacing it with a compound that could potentially kill the customer.
Right.
That's just
Unheard of. Yeah.
unheard of.
Yeah.
And so what happened is the guys that maintained that kind of ethos, establishing these type rules back in 1990, well, 25 years later, they're now in their 70s.
Mm-hmm.
You got a guy like Zambada, he's in his mid to late 70s. You got these other guys that are in their 60s. These are older men with the benefit of experience and wisdom. They understand how important it is not to attract the attention from the American law enforcement community.
Right.
Unfortunately for the domestic drug market in the United States, this newer crop of individuals don't have the experiences the older guys have. And so one of the biggest problems, that worked out to be a disaster was arresting Chapo Guzman, because the faction of the cartel that he controlled now reverted to his son's control. Well, these are all guys in their 30s.
Okay.
This particular faction, known as Los Chapitos, is the faction within Sinaloa that went all in on Fentanyl.
Okay.
And so when the government says, well, Sinaloa is involved in trafficking Fentanyl, no. This faction is involved. See, the Los Chapitos are at war with the new generation. The new generation is all in on Fentanyl. So the Chapitos are matching up. In Mexico, power is defined through political connections. And in order to accrue power politically, you have to have money. Whoever has more money has the most power in Mexico. Not weapons, not hitmen, not rockets, not munitions, political protection.
Right.
And so if the new generation is able to generate 3 to 4 times the profit per unit, hypothetically, let's say you got 1,000 kilograms coming from Colombia. Well, you could take 2,000 kilograms of gold medal flour, mix it into a huge mixture of 3,000 kilograms. Now, it's only a 30% purity level at this point.
Right.
Who's going to buy it? No one on the American side is going to buy it. But if you lace it with a few kilos of Fentanyl, all of a sudden you supercharge its power. The consumer doesn't realize you're only getting 1/3 of Coke.
Right.
You're actually getting primarily gold medal flour that's been laced with Fentanyl. And depending on who's doing the mixtures, it's just some guy, it's just some poncho guy with buckets. So if it's not equally distributed, you may end up taking a dose which is saturated with Fentanyl, in which case it leads to all of these.
Yeah.
That's, the majority of the individuals from drug use are casual users who are out partying, who take the equivalent of a hot shot.
Yeah.
Whether they're doing a line of crystal, they have no intention on doing the Fentanyl. That's why, in one of our earlier podcasts, I made this, the statement, and I stand by it in the sense that, you in good faith today can't get involved in drug trafficking. Like me, as a 19-year-old that was deeply libertarian, could, rationalize
justify. Yeah.
saying, hey, no one's forcing me to put into my body. I choose to do so. And if you want to put some in your body, that's your decision.
Right.
But it wasn't laced with Fentanyl. It wasn't laced with the compound.
Right. Well, there wasn't even the potential of it being laced.
Of course, particularly once we got involved with the manufacturing, we controlled it. We had a chemist who was making sure that it was pharmaceutical grade, no harmful impurities.
Right.
And so there was, you got to be fair to the Mexican equation. They didn't cut their product. They came to the United States unadulterated.
Right.
That was the understanding within the groups. Well, now it's coming, all of it is essentially saturated.
Right.
So if you're at some nightclub in New York or a nightclub in LA and you think you're going to go do a bump, well, that could be your last dose because you have no idea what you're actually taking.
Right.
And so what you're seeing is an enormous spike in the number of fatalities. You're having guys that are just nickel and dime drug dealers selling something at a nightclub. They're getting charged for homicides because they can't attest to the quality of the material.
Right.
Everything down the line, everybody's just hoping it's not cut.
Right.
Well, you're all going to get hammered for, the unfortunate woman who did a line at a nightclub and passed away. And so because of this new model that the new generation adopted, they're able to take those shipments that come from Colombia, dilute them 200, if not 300%. Well, that increases vastly the number of units you're selling. So if you're generating $5,000 profit per kilo prior to adulterating it, on that 1,000 keys, you're making $5 million. Well, all of a sudden you take that 1,000, turn it into 3,000, now you're making $15 million. Now do that with 20,000. All of a sudden they're accumulating money at a rate that no other cartel can match.
Right.
So then
they get more political power.
That expands their areas of influence. So Chapo Guzman's kids, Chapo Guzman's solution to this was kill them.
Yeah.
The kids are saying, no, we'll just fight fire with fire. Well, what it creates is a race to the bottom where all parties know that the short-term gain is going to result in a huge negative long-term loss, which is why not only were the Chapitos fighting the new generation, there was actually squabbles within the Sinaloa context themselves because they're fighting Zambada.
Right.
Because their organization is saying, we don't want none of this Fentanyl stuff involved. And unfortunately, in 2023, the Guzman faction gets charged for being the largest Fentanyl producers.
Right.
Earlier this year, just a few months ago, back in February, they charged Zambada's faction. They had to match the opposition. It's like in the, the armament context. China, Russia, and the United States all have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
China develops hypersonic weapons. Well, we have to match them.
Yeah.
We can't afford to allow them to have a...
The Russians get ballistic missiles. We have to create a ballistic
That's right.
missile.
So then we create autonomous weapons. Now the Russians have to do so. So you've got groups that are engaging in conduct that they don't want to engage in, but they have to do so because they can't coordinate with the opposition.
Survival. Right.
And so what it creates now is this dynamic where it's literally a race to the bottom. And the people that are actually suffering for the first time are the individuals who have no intention of consuming something that are essentially getting dosed, which is why in the end, you can see where this is going. We had an earlier episode where we did a game theoretic analysis on what the optimum solution would be. The government of the United States is not going to do that. They're not going to enter into an agreement with one of these groups.
Right.
Essentially give them a license to operate on the condition of no more Fentanyl.
Right.
That's the optimum solution. Politically, it's not tenable. In Mexico, it's not tenable because there's already a history, here in the United States, we are very fortunate in that we're not privy to a lot of what's going on. Our media does a lot of filtering. Or even if all you just watch the Spanish language news, the news productions on the Spanish language is very different from the American English language. There was a huge scandal where, Miles Zambada's son, who was the heir apparent to the Sinaloa cartel, Vicente Zambada, was in a relationship with high-level American government officials.
Right. They're providing information.
Yes. So you had, from the highest levels of the DOJ, highest levels of the DEA had approved a relationship with one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel who was there on behalf of the cartel, or at a minimum, the Zambada faction of the cartel. And this was concealed from the Mexicans. So here you got Vicente Zambada coming out of some, upscale hotel in Mexico City, and the Mexicans pounce on him like, boom, we got you, finally. He's like, what are you doing, man? I'm here meeting with the gringos.
Right.
They're like, gringos? What gringos? Up in 304.
Right.
You're meeting with gringos, and then you got DOJ guys, DEA. What the hell's going on here? And if you look at it from their perspective, you guys are in bed with these people.
Right.
That's not the president of Mexico's son meeting with cartel guys. It's American people meeting with the, So it was an enormous scandal in Mexico. So from the American perspective, it would be very difficult for us to enter into an agreement with any particular group to advantage them over the others, because right now that's the narrative in Mexico. Like, we may not be privy to it in the United States. There is nobody in Mexico who doesn't believe that the United States government is responsible for the drug crisis.
Right.
Just like everybody believes the United States government is flooding Mexico with guns. You had that massive scandal about 15 years ago with the Fast and the Furious investigation, where literally the ATF knew individuals were making straw purchases, buying weapons at gun stores in Texas, in Arizona, in New Mexico, and then turning around and selling those guns to cartel guys. They know they're doing it, and they let the guns go anyway. And these are some of the same firearms that ultimately American law enforcement, God knows how many thousands of Mexican citizens. And so when this thing came to light, Mexicans were like, hold on a second, you didn't stop them?
Right.
You let them keep going? And so then finally when the Americans said, okay, well, we're going to prosecute the straw purchasers, they went and they arrested several of these guys. You know how much time they got? 1 year probation. And so they're like, oh, okay, so you're flooding the country with guns and you're giving guys slaps on the wrist. That's when they're like, okay, just send as many drugs to the gringos as they want.
Right.
Like it's a two-way street. You don't want to stop the guns, they're not going to stop the product. And so
okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so from a game theoretic perspective, that solution is essentially off the table. So now you're talking about, well, you have a spectrum of suboptimal solutions. And so as we were talking before we started filming, in that context, I believe that they're going to make a credible threat of designating these groups, this particularly New Generation, as a terrorist organization. There's already been legislation in Congress submitted by Senator Cotton directing DOJ to eliminate their leader, not just DOJ, Department of Defense, to eliminate their leaders. They're just saying clandestine military action. And so you see this ground
in a sovereign country.
In a sovereign country.
Okay.
And so you have got a groundswell of recognition that this particular group is different than everybody else. So much so that senators want to sanction unauthorized actions in a sovereign nation. They also want to sanction designating them a terrorist organization, which, from the Mexican perspective, it would be a debacle because Mexico doesn't want to be a country labeled as a harborer of terrorist organizations.
Right.
Now, from the organization's perspective itself, I'm sure Mencho's not going to care. He's already looking at a life sentence if he gets caught.
Right.
He's like Guzman, whether you call him a terrorist or drug dealer, it's not going to change him. But what it does change, and where it gets interesting, is on the American side of the equation. Because there is an entire infrastructure, particularly in Los Angeles, which New Generation operates, that's their principal base of operations. In Los Angeles, there's an entire network of individuals who facilitate. These are the guys that man the stash houses. These are the guys that count the money. These are the guys that, pack up the cars or build the hidden compartments. Everybody along that chain now is providing material support to a terrorist organization.
Right.
So the days of getting 5 or 6 year sentences, that's gone. It's 30 piece. So it's going to give the government of the United States a tremendous hammer in which to induce a lot more cooperation. The big boys are always going to be the big boys, but they're the beneficiaries by getting them broke the profit. It's all these little fishes now that are going to be squeezed with the threat of a 30-year sentence that are obviously going to predominantly cooperate.
Right.
And whoever ends up winning the election, I believe, is going to make a credible push to say, this is what we're going to do. Mexico is going to fold because they're not going to have nobody declared a terrorist organization. You're going to see them essentially allowing American special forces being embedded with Mexican special forces and serving like an advisor capacity.
Mm-hmm. But really, they're just going to be hitting.
They're going to be driving. It's going to happen. It's the same thing they did in Colombia. Like the Colombians didn't take down Pablo Escobar.
Right.
That was an American operation, masked with a little bit of Colombian window dressing.
So how did the new generation through this whole thing morph into more of like an organized crime, organization where they start? Why did they start branching out?
Well, the feature that we highlighted, the Unified Central Command, allows it to direct more effectively. This isn't a herd of cats. This is essentially an army. And so now you have an ability to say, this is the territory we control, extract as much money from this territory. And so, besides the billions of dollars that the new generation made from drug trafficking, they have diversified into essentially nearly every sector of the economy in Mexico. And so, for 25 years now, 30 years now, we've had this NAFTA regime, which resulted in essentially the integration of the Mexican and American economy. You go south of the border, and you've got thousands of factories. In Spanish, they're called maquiladoras. And so, literally, thousands of companies are manufacturing goods in Mexico on behalf of American businesses. Well, that territory is cartel territory.
Right.
Every factory has to pay a fee to operate. It's a cost of doing business. It's like rent. It's like electricity. You have to pay. The goods that go to the warehouses have to pay. The trucking companies that transport it from Mexico into the United States, they have to pay. So now you're thinking, well, how much money can you be talking about? Well, let's say there was a leaked Mexican official report, like on their version of WikiLeaks.
Okay.
Where it revealed that the new generation is charging anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 per truck. And you're thinking, okay, it's $1,000. Well, look at the scope of the activity. The Tijuana port of entry alone gets somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000 trucks a day. So if it's $1,000 a truck, that's 15 million a day. On the higher value items, let's say it's computer parts or automobiles, they're charging 10,000 a truck. So it's anywhere from 15 million to $150 million per day just in extorting trucks coming across Tijuana.
Mm-hmm.
Nuevo Laredo is even bigger. That's 18 to 20,000 trucks a day.
Mm.
The new generation is literally generating as much money today through extorting trucks as they were in all of their drug activity pre-Fentanyl. Like as of 2016.
Right.
And it's not simply, and you have to understand that this is the crown jewel of the Mexican economy. And so we, for them, they're just at the point where they're like, look, do whatever the hell you're going to do, pass the fees on to the Americans. So whenever you're at Walmart buying something that was imported from Mexico, the new generation is getting their cut.
Right. Okay. I can see that.
You see what I'm saying? But it's also broader. It's not simply extortion with respect to the trucking. it's extortion with respect to, and this is more traditional organized crime, it's just a regular protection racket. And so, for instance, one of the prime produce produced in Mexico are avocados. Michoacan is ground zero for avocados. Well, every farm gets taxed for protection. You got to pay a fee per hectare to just grow avocados on your own land. Like they are extracting money at every instance along the value chain. So they're hitting the farmer for the land. Then at the farm gate, depending on the yield, they're taking a piece. Then the wholesale market, they take a piece from that. Then the company that does the packaging, they take a piece from that. Then the trucks that bring it to the United States, they take a piece from that. So every time you have guacamole, the new generation is getting paid. Agave, lime, berries. You have a shot at tequila, they're getting their money. Chase it with a slice of lime, they're getting their money.
Right.
There are literally tens of billions of dollars going into their coffers without anything to do with drugs. And so now you're seeing the ability, you're seeing the power of concentration. They're able to marshal together their forces in a way that none of the other groups have ever been able to do so.
So all this stuff is happening right just south of the border?
Well, the extortion operations are taking place on the border, but they're also happening throughout the country. But as far as its principal base of operations, it's in the Mexican state of Jalisco. For those of you not familiar with the Mexican geography, it's about 1,500 miles south of San Diego. In fact, here's a map. The area highlighted in blue is territory controlled by the new generation.
Well, that's black and white. Sorry, go ahead. All right.
And so, and that blue area consists of numerous organizations. Here is the network for the new generation. So you can see it's a number of organizations, but there's no sub-alliances. Everything is taking orders from Central Command.
Right.
Which is a very different model. And as we indicated earlier, they've got a very powerful militarized wing. In fact, it's famous for making these kind of public pronouncements and hyper-violent. And so...
What's the name of it?
Mata-Zetas.
Mata-Zetas.
And well, I don't
What's
know
Mata mean? The Zetas? Killer Zetas.
No, remember, you got to invert. Zeta killers.
Zeta killers. Zeta.
Mm-hmm.
And who are the Zetas with?
The Zetas, as of right now, they're essentially, well, the technical term is disarticulated. They've been crumbled.
Ah. Then can't they drop the killer part?
Well, see, here's the problem. And this is, again, a shortcoming in the decapitation strategy.
Right.
Because the way the new generation has been able to expand is they just wait in the cut. And so, for instance, when the Zetas were effectively neutered, you had a number of organizations that were now orphaned. They got gobbled up into the new generation.
Mm-hmm.
The Gulf Cartel gets essentially neutered. They get gobbled up. And that's how you have a group from Jalisco, way down in Guadalajara, controlling the port of entry in Nuevo Laredo on the border of Texas.
Right.
Because they have what's essentially a franchise model. And so now they have franchisees scattered all over the country.
Yeah, but they have a branding issue.
Well, that's part of their operation.
They need to rebrand.
No, that's part of the franchise model. They have to incorporate the term new generation in their title. So it's the new generation Tijuana, new generation Nuevo Laredo or Veracruz.
Yeah.
And so they are really strict on this branding issue. And so it's creating this fear. When you see guys like this on the news every night in Mexico, and this, they're holding rockets, they're holding, they've got other pictures where they got armored vehicles, like, they're like armed technicals.
Right.
50 caliber machine guns on top. These guys are just insane. And so they have struck a level of fear within the community to where these organizations, legitimate businesses, have no alternative but to pay. Another big cash cow for them is the theft of petroleum. Mm. In 2022, the last year we got numbers for, the Mexican state oil company, Pemex, reported that they had over $900 million in losses. So you've got these guys going with their own engineers, identifying pipelines. They're drilling precisely into the pipelines, extracting the oil. They got fleets of modified tanker trucks. They're just filling up the trucks with oil and then taking them to the black market. And so look, on literally every aspect of the Mexican economy at this point is being touched.
Yeah.
Whether it's restaurants forced to buy poultry from this particular group, you know, inflated prices on fish, inflated right across the board, entertainment, nightclubs, you know, residences, food, and of course, like I said, their crown jewels, which is trade with the United States. Remember, Mexico is our largest trading partner.
Yeah.
And so that's just an enormous piggy bank for them to just slice. And if you know all you're taking is just a small amount, in the aggregate, it ends up being such an enormous amount of money.
Right.
That you see this concentration of wealth, concentration of power, which is now prompting all of the other cartels, even those who weren't previously involved in Fentanyl, having to get involved in it just to try to keep up. And so it really creates this dynamic where there's a race to the bottom that in the end is not going to end well. Because, you know, once you keep prodding that slumbering American giant, at some point they're going to have to get up and they're going to have to do something, because this is not sustainable.
Okay. So what are, I mean, you're talking about all that stuff. Some of this is all happening in Mexico. What was the real estate part? You talked about the timeshares.
That just came out just a couple of days ago.
Okay.
Treasury Department and the FBI issued a notice because there have been over 6,000 documented cases where it's essentially another aspect of the racketeering operation, which deals with real estate fraud. And they've come up with this scheme, essentially. It's a scam where, you know, the largest concentration of American expatriates is in Mexico, predominantly in and around Jalisco. Puerto Vallarta's got an enormous population. There's an area south of Guadalajara, very big retirement community. And there are areas that are beach property where Americans own timeshares. So you'll notice in and around the Vallarta area, up in Nayarit, down in Cancun, that whole stretch, the Riviera Maya, that's new generation territory. And so what they have access to is the personal information of the Americans that own the timeshares. And so now they're able to create what are essentially, you know, like telecenters.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are they, like phone rooms?
Huge. They're like boiler rooms, but they contact the individual and they're representing themselves as being a representative from the management company for your timeshare.
Okay.
You have $60,000 tied up. They're in the process of selling. They have an offer to buy it. They'll buy back your share,
right,
for $90,000. You're thinking, wow, I just made a quick
$30,000,
30% profit. I'm in. Well, you're going to have to pay this fee, $1,500 for this fee, $700 for this license. You know, they just hit them with fees. They hit them with licenses. Then they're going to have to pay the Mexican attorney, because you have to have a Mexican attorney handle the business on the Mexican side. So that's $7,500. Oh, then you got to have all the documents translated from English and notarized into Spanish. That's another $1,800. So by the time they're done extracting money, they've got guys that they've hit people for tens of thousands of dollars. They've got one individual that they persuaded to send over $1 million. And so, you know, literally there are thousands, and these are the 6,000 that have been reported. You know, the FBI indicates that they believe that that's only 20% of the cases. Most people don't want to come forward and admit that they got duped, that, you know, they're embarrassed.
Right.
You know, and you got taken for $17,000, $18,000 on this scam. They just rather take the loss than go to their family even.
Yeah, you're never getting the money. I'm not getting the money back anyway.
You're not getting the money back anyway. So they're saying at least 6,000 documented cases. And this is the type of activity that's going to ensure you get a reaction, because you're targeting
Americans.
Honest Americans.
Right.
Not American criminals.
Yeah, these aren't even drug addicts.
These aren't drug dealers.
Yeah, yeah. Or drug addicts or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, these are just some guy sitting at home. He's got, he's in Omaha, Nebraska. He's got his timeshare down in Cancun. He just gets clipped for $25,000. And this is just happening. And, you know, and what's interesting is on several of the cases, they got them for tens of thousands of dollars. And when they contact the actual timeshare company, the an attorney from Mexico contacts them and says, "Oh, look, we can do this. It's another scam." They double dip.
Yeah, we can get your money back.
We can get your money back. We're
For
going to sue
another
this.
$5,000.
We're going to sue. Yeah, it's horrible. The operation that they're running now is just shocking.
And they're doing all this from within Mexico. So you've got Mexicans that are calling. Like are they saying they're? I mean, like, well, I guess it doesn't matter that we are calling from Mexico. I was going to say
they're Mexican. I mean, look, Guadalajara is Los Angeles' sister city.
Yeah.
And so there's a tremendous amount of personnel moving back and forth.
Right.
And in that area, like I said, it's the largest concentration of American expatriates in the world. And so there are entire businesses that are geared towards Americans. English-speaking dentists, English-speaking tax accountants.
God, I was going to go to. I was thinking about bringing Jess to Cancun. I mean,
they're going to be, the new generation gets their piece.
Well,
They're going to be staying at their hotel, buying their drinks.
Oh my God, so great! All I need is a hotel made with new generation investors. Sure, there's a little bit too much sand in that concrete. You know what I'm saying? Maybe the next collapse like that place down in Miami.
Well, remember, they don't build the institutions, the hotels and structures. Those are essentially legitimate companies that come in. They may be cartel controlled.
Right. Well.
Yeah, but no, they're
good guys.
No, but they're designed for the purposes of surfacing capital.
Right.
And what they want to be able to market it to Americans.
Okay.
And that's where the market is set up. So now there's an enormous, I think I forgot what the number was, but there was tens of thousands of Americans with timeshares in Mexico. Which is why the FBI is trying to be proactive, but they got all these cases, but there's essentially nothing they can do. The Mexican banks don't know that they get a wire from an American bank.
Right.
They don't know what the nature of the actual transaction is. So several of the victims on the American side want to sue Mexican banks, and the banks like, what are you talking about? You sent the money.
Right.
Like, you should have been more diligent. You didn't do your due diligence. How's it their responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really a conundrum, and it just illustrates how they've managed to diversify to the point where something that you would think would be the farthest from a from a militarized drug cartel,
right,
would now all of a sudden be running these type of sophisticated cons.
Right. I was going to say, and in a way, to me, it's a different version of the decentralized hierarchy, because I like the Sinaloa, you're saying they're all kind of running themselves, right? Like whatever, first of the equals or whatever, but I'm saying in this way, it's like, okay, our operations were hindered or, disrupted here. Well, it's okay. We're still bringing money in from all these other operations.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Okay, well, they really hammer us on the drugs. They're really shutting down the drugs. It doesn't matter. We've got this. Our fingers are in so many different things. They're not going to across the board be able to knock us out of it, unless you really just have to knock out the leadership as quickly as possible.
Which is why the handwriting's on the wall.
Right. Which is why you're saying the Americans are trying to push to say, hey, this is
designate them a terrorist organization. Mexico will say no, but the Mexicans will say, come on in and handle what you got to do.
Right.
Because you just can't have innocent Americans getting ripped off.
Right.
Plus, they're legitimately harming the Mexican state.
Right.
I mean, they just cost them $1 billion in fuel last year. And then all these additional taxes, well, that's disrupting their business operations and their legitimate businessmen, the wealthy guys that own those maquiladoras. Mm-hmm. Well, they don't want to be paying these taxes.
Right.
So they're going to their congressman saying, hey, what are you going to do? So, it's creating an untenable situation that I'm sure is going to come to a head fairly early in whatever the next administration is going to be. And so, you and I, before we were talking, you were like, well, if Trump wins and he builds the wall, that'll put an end to it.
Right.
And, right before I left Coleman, we got a guy that showed up, and he was New Generation.
Okay.
And his stories were just out of this world.
Right.
And he, they built quite a bit of the wall. In fact, here you go, Coleman. This is, and it shows, this map shows the wall that was built, along with the construction, pre-construction, and anticipated.
Right.
And so you can see it's a significant stretch.
Right.
And although, the lion's share of the material is always going to come through the ports of entry. You got 15,000 trucks in TJ, 18,000 trucks in Laredo. You got
There's a
20,000 cars.
Yeah, a lot of camouflage, a lot of,
Yes. And so, but in order to disperse the Border Patrol, you don't want them all concentrated at their stations. You got to break it up.
Right.
So the other methods that they smuggle are essentially decoys. But, the American Border Patrol can't fail to respond.
Right.
And so, like, at the border between San Diego and Tijuana, there's a beach. Well, that goes right to the ocean. So
Right.
you're on this side of the hypothetical line, you're on the sand in Mexico. Over here, 10 feet over, you're on the sand in LA, in San Diego.
Right.
And so, we built like a little perimeter that goes out X number of yards. Well, what they'll do is they'll take those little Jacques Cousteau boats,
They'll just,
come around. So they got to patrol the beaches.
Right.
The migrants coming in from Central America, every once in a while, they'll give them a backpack.
Right.
Because that way they got to go out there and they got to check every guy coming in looking for drugs. Again, of course, you have the tunnels.
Right.
But the way the new generation individual was telling, he's like, in order for them to essentially really with the Americans, he says they built an entire fleet of catapults.
Right.
I know, and I'm just like, and you stop and think about it, like, here we are in the 21st century, the walls that are being built, state-of-the-art technology, motion detectors, sensors, the height of American ingenuity.
Right.
And these guys are defeating that with 1,200-year-old technology.
Yeah.
And so I pulled up some photos for your viewers, like, here's one of the catapults. So you have duffel bags full of parked in front of the catapult, and they'll just put it right like on an old boat trailer.
And then
They just drive out. Just launch catapults. And the thing about it is,
you got one on the other side running around trying to catch
the thing
it.
is that, the catapults aren't illegal.
Right. Yeah,
And
what
so-
am I doing wrong?
And so the Border Patrol sees them driving down the road like they're driving along the Rio Grande
Right.
with
So,
the fucking catapult. So they got to go out and watch them. Like,
they're just wasting their
we're
time.
just wasting their time. We got just catapults going back and forth just to fuck with the Americans.
Right.
He said at nighttime they do break them out and know every once in a while those suit loads over the walls. He says, but now they're on to drones. Says they've got an entire fleet of drones. It's like, there's so many drones flying in the sky. It's like the air pattern over LAX. He says it's just drones just going back and forth. And just, and you're just thinking that
This is a massive, massive problem. How do you fix that?
and it's the unified central command. Because you got someone who's able to say, okay, you're going to do the catapults,
Right.
you're going to do the drones, you're going to do the tunnels, you're going to do the little boats.
Well, and if you have 80 organizations making their own decision, this one organization decides, hey, you know what? Let's do some catapults. Okay, how many can they put together? 10? But if you have the main guy say, you out of all these 60, you 30 organizations are going to make 15 apiece.
Yeah.
Like now it's huge. Now it's a massive amount.
Yeah.
So every time they make a decision to consolidate that, because of that consolidated power that goes, that order is distributed amongst many nodes, then they come up with a hell of a lot more of a disruption.
Yeah.
Than
So, like I said,
alone.
if you've got 15 organizations along the border and they can say, hey, I want you to each put six catapults in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 90 catapults every evening going out into the field. But only 5 of them are being used.
Right. But even then,
But it requires
it requires at least 2 agents in a truck to try and follow them. Even then, now you've got 180 agents driving around trying to
keep track of catapults, or they'll just send over like tomatoes.
Yeah.
Like
You could shoot it. You could shoot up with old clothes. You could shoot up dirt or your hay. Whatever.
You don't know which one of them is actually using contraband.
Right. So if 3 of them start shooting them off, and then the other guys, they call for backup. They're shooting these. They call for backup.
Yeah.
That just leaves how many?
Or
87.
they open them up as duffel bags full of avocados.
Right.
Meanwhile, you got an entire strike force collapsing on the scene. I mean, it's like when you're in prison. When deuces go off, all the guards respond.
Mm-hmm.
But if deuces go off the 4th or 5th time that day, like now it's like, it's probably just another false alarm.
Right.
You know what I mean? They start conditioning them to, every time I go out there and chase these guys down, I get duffel bags of tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the time you don't go, maybe the time.
Right. The thing is, I was going to say, plus they don't really, it's like we were talking to, I'm not going to say his name, in Coleman, like, they were just the people like where they're sending 8 cars across and they know one's going to get caught. Like this is the one that, like it's a decoy, and then they let the rest go. And it's like, oh, but you lost that load. It's like we can lose lots. Like we're making so much money, we can lose half those loads, and we can lose 90% of the loads, and we'll break even.
Yep.
And then that's never going to happen.
Yeah. Well, like I said, during the course of Guzman trial, the government established that the success rate was 1%. So out of 100 cars coming through the border,
one gets stabbed.
Then they lose one. And so that's not including, the tractor trailers. That's not including the trains. All this commerce that, when NAFTA was passed, every drug trafficker in the United States celebrated because it increased the amount of commerce exponentially, which of course allowed for free flowing, obviously product coming one way, money going back.
Right.
It may have been a disaster for the middle class.
Right.
But for the underworld, it was a gift. And until someone makes a decision that, we may have to reevaluate whether or not we're going to remain in these type of trade agreements, there's essentially nothing that can be done. You can build, like I said, you build a 2,000-mile wall. They're going to break out the catapults. They're going to break out the drones. They're going to break out the tunnels. You build a 20-foot wall, they build a 10-foot tunnel.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so at some point, you really need to start thinking about collaboration, which is, from the game theoretic perspective, the most optimal solution. Find one of the groups in Sinaloa, someone that's like in their 50s. It can't be Zambada. He's in his 70s. His time in the sun's coming to an end.
He's in his 70s or he's in the 80s? He's really old,
late
right?
70s, yeah.
Oh, late 70s, okay.
So now, but he's got a son. He's 40 years old.
Right.
See, the heir apparent is in American prison. So, Vicente Zambada's out of the way. Well, when Vicente Zambada fell in 2009, the next son took over.
Right.
So for the last 15 years, Maito's been being groomed.
Right.
Well, today he's a 40-year-old man. You can maybe approach someone like that and say, hey, look, we're going to remove your enemies. Stop the Fentanyl. That kind of an arrangement can be made. Now, they're going to obviously, look, we're going to try to knock off your loads. We'll keep playing the game, but we're going to go back to where it was in 2016.
Right. At least the American citizens aren't dying.
At least it's not 100,000 fatalities.
Right. It's not some 17-year-old girl try and blow for the first time at a club.
Yeah.
Ends up overdosing and dying.
Yeah.
I have a question. Brandon?
I remember Brandon.
Do you remember exactly what happened with his? I've said it over and over again. I'm sure I always get the story slightly wrong.
Brandon was a doorman at a nightclub.
I always say bouncer.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right?
Yeah. He was a doorman at the nightclub. And look, if you're at the nightclubs, you know who's coming around, he knows who the local drug dealers are, of course. And so, you got some girls coming to him. Hey, Brandon, good looking guy. He's up front. He interacts with everybody because he's out front. So he knows, everybody knows who he is. They want to get a little bit of party supplies. He directs them to, hey, well, go talk to Jimmy. Hey, Jimmy, these girls want to talk to you.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, the local dealer is distributing a product that's been laced.
Okay.
And so when, these girls go and they make their purchase, one of them overdoses and passes away. So now the dealer gets busted. Yeah. He's getting prosecuted and he's facing death, a drug-related homicide enhancement.
Right. But he says, you know what? Because of the code, I'm just going to take this on the chin like a champ. I'm not giving up anybody.
Yeah. No. So in order to get out from underneath that enhancement, he goes around and he lets them know, well, Brandon hooked us up.
Right.
Well, all Brandon did was, hey, go talk to this guy over here if you're looking to party.
Right.
Like he had no interest in the transaction. He didn't get a cut. He didn't make any money.
Right.
He essentially directed somebody but under the American concept of conspiracy.
Right. He's a
Brandon,
part of it. He's in it.
He's in it, and technically he distributed it.
Right.
They're saying he distributed it vicariously through the trafficker.
Okay.
And so he ends up getting, he goes to trial, gets convicted, and gets enhanced for the homicide.
Right.
So, and that's what's happened hundreds of thousands of times in the last 5 years.
So when I tell a story,
Mm-hmm.
I have a slightly different version. Obviously I'm off. Is my slightly version is that I didn't know it was a group of girls. I just it's one chick that comes up to him and says, "Listen, she's on oxys. I'm having problems. I'm feeling sick. Do you know anybody?" He doesn't know anybody. He's like, "I do know a guy that sells oxy or maybe heroin or something." And he says, "I can give you his number." Gives her the number, whatever. She calls the guy's like, "I got heroin," and gives her heroin, and she ends up from the heroin overdose. That's what I thought it was.
Yeah, well, I understood it was someone that he knew from the nightclub,
Right.
who just knew him as a doorman.
Yeah. No, he was definitely not.
But he was not a dealer.
Yeah, no, she wasn't dealing. He wasn't getting a cut. She just was saying in my version, I always thought she was like, "I'm sick. Do you know anybody?" He said, "Yeah, I do know somebody."
Well, that may very well have been the context. I'm saying that he was approached by a woman.
Okay, well, I'm good.
He knew from the nightclub, who indicated an interest in buying.
I remember these stories, but I'm always remember, you hear it from 4 different people and you get kind of a mesh of what happened. And so I'm always like, when I know somebody that knows that person, I'm like, what was the story again? Because just to make sure that I'm close, I'm pretty close. It's a group of girls. I'm saying, I thought it was one girl, so who knows, whatever. Well, they get Brandon, he's never going to come on here.
Brandon's still at the halfway house.
Oh, I know. What is he at the half? I thought he moved or did he go? Is he on ankle monitor?
I'm coming up on week after next. I will have been out of prison now for a year.
Right.
And so my interactions with the halfway house is now ending.
Okay.
And so, but when I was there,
he was living there?
No, I saw him every week.
Oh, okay. Well, he's not at the halfway house. No, he's on ankle monitor.
He's considered a resident, just out custody.
Oh, for God's sakes! You with the semantics. Listen, he's living at home.
Well, with an ankle monitor. He reports to the halfway house at least once, if not twice a week.
He said he had told me that I thought he was out. Yeah, I thought he was out. He ended up, I think, moving back in with his ex-girlfriend, who he said we were together the whole time I was locked up, but somehow she got pregnant. He's super funny. I mean, he's just the nicest guy. Super tall, very nice. You just couldn't. I can't even imagine him being a doorman. He just doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would.
He wasn't the bouncer. He was,
Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah, no, kind of? He's the guy he's interacting. He's got the owner's list. He's the one.
Oh, okay. So he's the guy that you can come in.
Yeah, come on, sweetheart.
No, not dressed like that. No.
So he's the little bit on the more polished side.
Okay.
And like I said, good guy. He was Amadeo's principal typist.
Yep. I always say that. Amadeo would be like, "Brandon, type this up." And then Brandon, "Okay, Frank, what's this?" Because Frank's handwriting was horrific. Yeah. And then I always think of Brandon. He didn't type all my stuff, though. He had a couple other typists, though. He had several typists.
Well, no, he had his whole little group of typists that were in-house.
He was the main guy. Brandon was the main.
Brandon was the guy that did Frank's personals.
Oh.
It was a higher degree of responsibility. Yeah, so you may have been farmed out to
I got probably a
cho.
Yeah. some cho type my shit out. It's just icky. But and then Frank would get it, and then Frank would get the typed version, and then he would edit it. And it's like, the f are you doing? I just typed that, I'll edit it before I type it, and Brandon would have to retype the thing.
No, because remember, Brandon had the office, and he had one of the electric typers with memory.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, listen, when we say memory, it's not what you think.
Yeah, it's 1995 IBM Select Mark or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a cartridge that has a ribbon, and somehow it has memory. Is it memory in the ribbon, or was where was the memory in the typewriter?
Can you insert a photo right here?
Yeah.
And I'll pull up a picture.
Oh my God! If you saw these things, bro.
Yeah, and so
you want me to look it up?
Yeah, just IBM Select.
Hold on.
Keep in mind, those were the flagship.
Right.
Those are the privileged people. So I had one in my office.
Right.
Amadeo had one, personal one in his office. Brandon had one out at the factory where he worked.
Listen, these were coveted.
Yeah. You get $500 easily for one of them typewriters. I can't tell you how many people tried to buy mine. And I would just, I'm not going to sell my typewriter.
Yeah, I'll never get another one.
Yeah, and you know what I mean? Mine was brand new out of the box.
Did they? I have a question. Before you left, were they giving you guys tablets?
They began with the tablets, yes, but they were, they were essentially game playing.
Right. So you could play video games on them.
Yes. But it was like rudimentary type games. It was not like cool.
Not like Halo.
No, nothing like that.
It's more like Pac-Man and
Well,
shit.
it wasn't old stuff. It was games designed specifically for that platform. You could also rent movies. But it's, the PG-13s.
I don't care.
Yeah. And so.
Ridiculous. It's luxury.
Yeah. And then you hadn't, they were integrating being able to transfer your music to it.
Listen, when they got the MP3 players and you could download MP3, whatever. Yeah, you could download the music. Listen, that was like they just knocked 20% off my time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like amazing because the little radios, these little shitty radios you could buy on commissary we're out in the middle of nowhere. You could get like 4 channels. Like it was, and it depended on what time of day if you could get them at all. And it was mostly like very faint and crackly, and then at night you would get a better channel. If guys would try and get on the right side of the certain sides of the building, so it would come in loud, or so it would come in more clear.
Yeah,
that's how bad it was. So when you got the MP3 player, you're like, oh wow, I can download Chris Rock, the Kid Rock. What am I saying? Oh my God, Chris Rock. No, you couldn't do that because that would be like comedy. They didn't have any comedy. But yeah, you could download.
No, they added comedy.
Oh, they did. Oh, all the good stuff when I left.
But it's all the profanities. Like you can't listen.
Oh, they beep. That's right. The Kid Rock that we got, like they cut it out because they're
all censored versions.
Yeah, you never you never met a like me. You never met a white boy you never met some whatever. Yeah. They would have the clean versions.
Yeah, that's what they called them.
Yeah.
And
it was white boy like me. I think they said white. I don't know. I think they changed it somehow or another.
Yeah. And so they were getting ready to start adding books also, which would change the dynamic because now remember, like for those 2 years you were running lockdowns, so you weren't familiar with the pandemic lockdowns.
Right.
It was you couldn't go to the library.
People could mail stuff in though, right? Books.
Yes, but it was, they came in and remember how like spectacular that library was in A2?
Yeah.
It's all gone. Because the guys in the other units were using the in-house libraries. They were cutting open spots and hiding the phones in them.
Oh.
And so instead of searching every book, they just took all the books.
All right.
Yeah. And so having an ability to order the books yourself would obviously be a huge game changer.
All right. Okay. But they're going to make you pay for them.
Yeah, of course.
So I got to pay for the books. I can order it, but you got to pay for it. Instead of having your family move it. Oh, I guess your family just sends you the money. You order the book yourself.
They were already implementing a pilot program where you don't get your mail anymore.
Oh, so you just read it.
Yeah, they scan it for you and they send it to you. And so the little pads are going to be incorporated into that. Because the amount
they were getting the
amount of product coming into the prison is just
because it's K2, it's a liquid, right? Mm-hmm. So they would just like on page 31 of a book, they just dip it. And so and you get a book, tear out page 31, they could roll it up and smoke it. Yeah. And then of course then they turned it to it has to come from the publisher. Well, I mean, there's so many publishers. Anybody can be a publisher.
Yeah.
You just make up an invoice, stick it in there, wrap it around it, and send it with a label saying you're a publisher. And now guess what? The prison lets in a book that they think came from a publisher, but it didn't. It came from Inside True Crime Publishing. They don't know. So it's just like they implement these things, but people quickly find ways around them, and
there's always a workaround. And they had a real bad problem with drone episodes.
Really?
Yeah. And so there was probably probably a good 10, 12 drones.
Oh my God.
Made it through over the course of a few months. And then on one of them, you had the 2 fences. You had the outside perimeter fence and then the inside perimeter fence.
Right.
the drone dropped the package in between the two.
So the guy try and get it?
Well, yeah, they're out there with like broom handles,
Oh my God.
like trying to fish it, and they weren't able to do it. And so at some point, one of the guards actually does a perimeter check, and he stumbles across, and you got a dozen phones,
Right.
bag of weed, and
What an idiot drops it in the middle of like, you can, I'm sure you want, I understand you want to drop it close to something, a fence or something, but that's where it would be good if the guy working the drone had been in the prison.
Yeah.
And knew, like, this guy's probably thinking, oh, just drop it there. They'll grab it. Like, you're not getting in there.
Yeah. And so then there was a second time where it got stuck on the concertina wire
Yeah.
on the second fence. And so at that point, the captain just went nuts. It'd be like every time there's a drone, everybody's locked down for a month. And then it's every time there's a drone, there's 3 months lockdown. And it's like, you're at a low, you're running everything on lockdown.
Yeah, what are you doing?
It's like, and then so they really lost control of that situation. Because, it was funny because like one time they had like a sting. Like they knew the bag was out there. And so they wait to go out and get they're watching someone to grab the bag.
Right.
Well, he grabs the bag, it gets distributed. And by the time they go, they just, there's 700 guys coming off the yard.
Who knows who has what? You can't search 700 guys.
Yeah, it was just like,
Or did they search them? Try and search them?
They didn't get it.
Yeah. Some of these guys will suitcase a phone like that.
Yeah.
Like you're like, wow, that's quite a talent you got there.
And so, the drones were an enormous issue there. And like the New Generation guy says, they've got an entire squadron at each one of these border crossings, just running drones. And so at some point, you appreciate the fact that we have lost control of the situation, which is part of the reason why you see so many people in the country losing faith
Right.
in these type of institutions. Because if you stop and think about it, from 1981, when Reagan declared his war on drugs, till now, they've spent over $1 trillion. It's worse today than it was. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
what's the return on that investment? And, it's, did you read the book, The Haldeman Diaries? You did?
No. Who did? Who read it? What is that?
In 1994, there was a book called The Haldeman Diaries that came out. And
Dude,
in fact,
I don't think I really learned to read till I was probably in prison. Like,
okay, well, there was a book called The Haldeman Diaries. Haldeman was one of the main guys, and I think he was actually like Attorney General for Nixon.
Okay.
And, they had a recording system at the White House.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Right? So it's not speculation or it's not secondhand accounts. They, so like Watergate happens, 72 is a break-in, 74 he resigns. It was like 20 years later, the tapes are made available.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so like for the first time, we're actually able to hear what they were saying.
Nixon saying, well, tell those guys to go in there and plant those bugs.
But the interesting part wasn't the discussion about Watergate.
Quick, can I stop you for a second?
Go ahead.
Watch this. Do you know what Watergate is?
No, it's something. History wasn't my interest.
What?
No,
Did he know who Nixon was?
President,
he
right?
was a president. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I can tell you I've heard Watergate many times, but when people say it, I'm just like, oh yeah.
Well, you know what you also hear is that you'll hear because it was such a big deal, is that the media will tweak it now. So there's a big, let's say there's a big scandal. They'll call it, they'll throw a gate on the end of it. Mm-hmm. They'll say, oh, it's the skating gate. You know what I'm saying? Because maybe there's something that has something to do with skating in the U.S. skating something. There was a big scandal or fraud or something. They'll say. So the Watergate. So back to Watergate. Watergate was the Watergate Hotel, and Nixon's staff, some of Nixon's staff members hired someone that hired several professional burglars to. What do you mean? What am I getting it wrong?
No,
They broke into
it wasn't professional burglars. It was an FBI agent named Gordon Liddy.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Go ahead.
G. Gordon Liddy was the leader of a group called the Plumbers.
Well, yeah. Who were they hired by?
They were hired by the Nixon campaign.
Okay. Not the administration. So the campaign.
Yeah,
so the campaign hires
the
them.
committee to re-elect the president.
Okay.
Called CREEP.
Oh.
And so the Nixon campaign hires this FBI agent to organize a group of individuals to start doing break-ins.
They weren't professionals?
No,
They're being paid?
Well, yeah, I'm sure they were.
Being professional?
These guys were true believers, essentially.
Okay.
And so they, remember, it was a different world. You had a very conservative administration that was at odds with the anti-war left.
Right.
And this is getting ready to the point that I'm about to make.
Okay.
You know, the Nixon campaign had essentially two political opposition groups, anti-war left and blacks.
Okay.
And so they needed to come up with a way to demonize and neutralize these two groups. When the White House tapes got released, it resulted in a book getting published called The Haldeman Diaries.
Well, we're still talking about Watergate.
Yes. So here's the whole point. Okay. So once they got the actual tapes, they were able to go interview the people that were personally involved.
Okay.
Like, hey, by the way, you said this.
Right.
You said this. Right. And so in connection with the drug activity, it came to light what the actual purpose of declaring drugs a problem was. Nixon didn't care about the drugs. Republicans didn't care about the drugs. It was a pretext designed to attack their political opposition. And so when Ehrlichman gets confronted with, hey, this is the tapes and this is what you said, here's his quote. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavy, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. That's the genesis of the drug war.
Okay.
Had nothing to do with drugs.
Just a way to neutralize your opponents.
This is a way to cast aspersions upon your political opponents.
Right.
And so this was the actual premise where the participants in the room, and this isn't the guy 30 years later saying, or 20 years later saying, yeah, this is what we did. You say, no, we were recorded saying that.
Right.
What can we do to neutralize these blacks?
Right.
And what can we do to neutralize these hippies?
Yeah.
Why don't we do this?
Okay.
But now you contrast that with their actual public statements. They're acting like they care about the American people, the health of the American people. These drugs are really bad. How they pitch it, the narrative they produced was completely false.
Okay.
Okay. That is the genesis. Not just, this is an example of where things went off the rails in this country.
Okay. Well, are we going to finish talking about Watergate? So
yes.
we can.
So now here you see. So this tells you, well, the Watergate aspect of the story is over with.
No, it's not. He doesn't know what Watergate is. Neither does 80% of the people watching this.
Look.
So anyway, the FBI puts together the burglars.
G. Gordon Liddy puts together a team of guys. They go break into a man named Daniel Ellsberg's office.
Right. In the Democratic. And the Democrats.
No, initially
I thought
it was Ellsberg's office. He's the individual who procured material from the military that was released to the Washington Post and the New York Times that were dubbed the Pentagon Papers.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And it demonstrates that the government of the United States knew before the escalation in Vietnam that they couldn't win.
Right.
Again, it's another instance of false narratives.
Yeah.
And so you start seeing this repeated pattern where you get...
Was his office located in the Watergate Hotel?
No. So you did the Ellsberg break-in first. Then they said, you know what? Let's go and do the same thing for the Democratic office. So what they did is they broke into the Democratic campaign
office
headquarters in the Watergate building, and they bugged it. So they put in listening devices. Well, what they didn't expect was later on the Supreme Court that same year declared listening devices illegal. So now they had to break back in to take out the bugs.
I did not know that. So you know what I thought happened was when they were in there planting the bugs, they got caught.
No,
It was when they went back in to get them?
To get them.
Well, they're just trying to do the right thing. That seems reasonable. Why do that at all? Why not say, just let it go? What does it matter?
Because look, the Democrats aren't stupid. You know, and they were being represented by an individual who was certainly the most powerful defense attorney in the entire country, a man named Edward Bennett Williams. He actually made it onto Nixon's enemies list.
Okay.
And
He had like a little list.
he had a whole list. Yeah, Edward Bennett Williams, like one of the guys at the very top.
Okay.
And so they didn't want to, he almost came close to blowing the lid off Watergate. He just didn't know about the bugs.
Okay.
Because he's the one that was suing the committee to reelect the president.
All right.
And so you had all these moving parts going on. And so the point is you had a fundamental change in our country where the powers that be started, providing these false narratives that people, segments of the population, no longer believed. And Watergate was certainly one of them. The Vietnam War was certainly one of them. You know, and so you had a change fundamentally in our country. Because up until the 1970s, our country has always been a story based on growth. You know, we're a very young country, and we were fortunate in that within, 1776, declare independence, 1787, Constitution takes effect, 1789, Bill of Rights gets amended. And within 50 years, you got, we're in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. So we went from what was essentially an agrarian society to an industrial society relatively quickly. So we got all the benefits without a lot of the bullshit. And so the American story has always been one of growth. Your grandfather knew that if he worked hard, his son's life's going to be better. And your father believed that if he worked hard, your son's, 50 years ago, a guy working at an auto plant could support his own entire family. He's the primary breadwinner. The wife's at home. He's paying the mortgage, 2 cars, paying the kid to go to school. Well, middle-class guy can't do that today.
Right.
Blue-collar guy can't do that. His wife's got to work. He's probably working 2 jobs. He's got a side hustle. Well, something has fundamentally changed, which is what's caused this loss in trust in all of our institutions. And the drug war is an illustration of that. It was premised on a completely fabricated basis that the Nixon White House wholly concocted.
Right.
Now,
There's lots of things like that. It's very
10 years later, it's a similar circumstance. Remember, we had a difficult period. You had, the Arab oil embargo. We got our asses handed to us in Vietnam. 5 years later, the Sandinistas take over. And so in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And so you had, the Western Hemisphere has always been our backyard. So you had a Cuban regime, a communist regime in Cuba. Now a communist regime in Nicaragua. We just lost to the commies in Vietnam.
All right. So they elect Reagan.
They elect Reagan, and what's he decide to do? He breaks out the Nixon playbook.
Mm-hmm. War on drugs.
War on drugs, because you had indigenous groups that were supporting revolutionary ideas in other Central American countries, whether it was Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala.
God, I wonder, what do you think Reagan, how much do you think he dumped into the military? You think he doubled the budget or what?
A tremendous amount of money into the budget, but here's the thing.
No, I don't mean the budget. I'm sorry, I meant like the military budget.
Yeah, there was a significant increase.
Yeah. Because, one of the things he was doing was saying he really pushed the narrative of the Soviets in the imminent Soviet invasion of the United States. Soviets were never going to invade the United States. It was never even a discussion.
Yeah.
Like they can't get their people here. They don't have the transports. And the U.S. knows this 100%. We know, we can see what you have. You don't have transports. You have no way. Your country is so massive, you can barely get around your country. You got railroads going everywhere. Like, you're not getting them on boats and shipping them over here. It's never going to happen. You can't transport them here. But he pushed that narrative, scared the piss out of everybody. Mm-hmm. And so what do we need? We need more money in the military.
Well, when Reagan wins office, and keep in mind, at this point, I was 10 years old, 11 years old. I was a diehard Ronnie fan.
Right.
I
love Reagan.
Okay, yeah,
I love Reagan. I get it. You manipulated things, but that's just everybody does.
Yeah. And so what you had though is, an effort on his part. We had to have a basis to get munitions, arms, and material and advisors into these countries. Well,
Right.
the reason why you get these communist insurgencies is because they're fighting against quote unquote American imperialism.
Right.
And so we had to manufacture a basis to get advisors into Honduras, Guatemala, to make sure that these other countries don't fall the way Nicaragua did.
Right.
So they break out the old playbook. They use the war on drugs. And if you stop and think about it for a moment, it was always BS, because their premise was, we're going to disrupt the drug markets here by curtailing supply. Well, the proposition of curtailing supply provided them with the basis to say, we're going to put helicopters, rockets, missiles, and all these little countries, Panama, all the other ones, make sure that they don't get overthrown, under the pretext of counter-narcotics operations.
Right.
Well, what happened is, we're now 40 years later. We're now 2 generations later. Like, you don't even know who Ehrlichman or Haldeman were, much less read the book today or 30 years ago when it came out. Well, the 99% of the people in the country don't know that Nixon's on tape saying, okay, gin up a phony bullshit drug war.
Right.
And the Attorney General makes these kind of statements. Well, the problem is you got the people operating the, running the ship today who don't know that it was all a pretext 4 decades ago.
Right.
They never actually meant to do what you're trying to do. And so what you actually done is you create a circumstance where the consequences of your decisions are predictable. You start interrupting the Colombians coming to Florida. What do? They go to California with Mexico. You intercept their loads, they increase production. They increase production, they got to find new markets. Now here comes when we had that whole episode dealing with unintended consequences. Well, essentially, the geopolitical fight against communist insurgents created the drug epidemic in the United States, because there was never an attempt to disrupt the markets. The historical precedent where it actually succeeded was in China. The commies fought the war in China. They won the Civil War. Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists flew to Taiwan.
Right.
So the Republicans or the democratic people that are Chinese are in Taiwan. The commies that are Chinese are in China. And so one of the first things the Chinese did is say, okay, well, we're going to shut down the opium trade. No more British Empire opium.
Right.
So they shut down the opium, they shut down the heroin. Okay, now how are you going to curtail the drug use? They put 2 million people in re-education camps.
Right.
They broke the market by curtailing demand, not supply. Now, if they catch a dealer, they just executed him.
Right.
But they stopped the market by curtailing demand. You either were re-educated and stopped using, or if you relapsed, you were executed. So that's why, like today, when you see, the American government goes to the Chinese and saying, hey, stop the precursors. They're like, what are you doing for demand?
Right.
You wouldn't have a problem if you put these people in jail. But that's a politically untenable proposition in the United States. They're not going to arrest the consumers.
Right.
But they've created this narrative that the problem is because of the supply side.
Right. It doesn't make it's actually capitalist.
Capitalistic. It's
Yeah,
right.
it's really stupid.
That's why it's a fool's errand, because as powerful as federal law enforcement agencies are, they're not as powerful as the market.
Right.
And the market forces overcome it. And if you want an illustration?
Sure. I love illustrations.
Okay, let's do it this way. We're here near Tampa. You have a sewage treatment plant in Tampa, presumably. You don't dump everything into your beautiful bay.
Of course.
Okay, so if we go to Tampa sewage treatment and say, hey, you know what? Fill up my cup with human feces. How much are you going to charge me?
All right.
Better yet, let's get a few 55-gallon drums full. We got a large supply of human feces. Now let's go to Costco and buy ice cream cones. You are going to corner the market on selling what we'll call shit cones.
Okay.
Take one scoop of shit,
I
put
feel
it on an ice
like
cream
you're not
cone.
going to sell a lot of those.
Well, according to the government, supply creates a market.
Right.
We've got an unlimited supply of shit. You got an unlimited supply of shit cones.
Right.
Why aren't we selling them?
Right.
There's no demand. It doesn't matter how much supply there is. It's always demand driven in a commodity space. I'm not talking about technology. Whenever people be go, oh, what about the iPhone? No. I'm saying in the commodity space, markets are a function of demand. And even if you take your shit cone from $1 a cone to 50 cents a cone to a penny a cone, you're still not going to sell any.
Horrible example, by the way. Also, can I point this out? Colby, so Nixon was implicated in the whole Watergate scam. He was implicated where he knew what was happening. And so that's why he ends up there in the process of impeaching him, and he resigns and makes Ford? What are you, okay. All right. What
Nixon
happens?
was not involved in the break-in.
No, I'm not saying he was
He wasn't
driving the truck.
He wasn't aware of the break-in at the time. He
was aware in the cover-up.
He orchestrated the cover-up.
Yes, they came.
When he found out that you did what? Like, he's like on tape.
You know,
did
that's
what?
that's like you and John rob a bank, and you come to my house, and I help you count the money and launder it. Or not launder it, but I help you count the money and hide it. Even though it's after the fact, I'm still now an accessory to the bank robbery. I'm now a part of the conspiracy.
You're an accessory after the fact.
Yeah, but I'm still part of the conspiracy.
No, I'm an accessory after the fact.
Oh,
he was an accessory after the fact. He
Okay,
was
so
not
Nixon was still involved.
Yeah.
Accessory after the fact, if you want to get technical, but he was still involved in the whole thing because afterwards, when they told him what happened, he starts to try and come up with, you know, like they're trying to pay the guys to shut up or whatever. They're trying to get everybody to be quiet and keep your mouth shut, and we'll get you out of jail or whatever it's going to do. So as a result of that, they started impeachment hearings. I thought they started impeachment, and then he
had the payoffs. They got lawyers for everybody, and then one of the deputy directors of the FBI took on the role of an individual named Deep Throat.
Yes.
And he leaked the fact that, hey, they're recording all the conversations.
It doesn't matter.
So now he gets in trouble because he starts editing the tapes. Like, oh, get rid of that one. Oh, get rid of this one. Oh, we can't say that. You know what I mean? So now Nixon was dead to rights because they got him on tape after the break-ins, laughing about it.
Right.
That was a nice one there. You know, so he was clearly complicit in the overall scheme.
Did they not start impeachment?
Yes, they initiated an
What
investigation.
did I say? That doesn't matter. That's detail. It's the same thing. They start the impeachment process, and then he decides he's going to resign and step down, and he appoints. Well, obviously the vice president didn't appoint. The vice president becomes. And who is it? Ford.
Gerald Ford.
Yeah. So Gerald Ford becomes president, and Nixon says he didn't. That's when Nixon does his famous speech. You know, I am not a criminal. You ever heard? I'm not a criminal.
I remember
Not
my
a
history teacher doing that.
Right. Because he heard the whole face. His face was all not a criminal. But anyway, he steps down. Gerald Ford becomes president, and he pardons him. And of course, everybody assumes that there was an agreement beforehand, although they said there was no agreement. But can't allow. Gerald Ford said, I can't allow for an ex-president to be, impeached or whatever, charged or whatever. So I'm, for the presidency, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, is that right too?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Very good.
My God, Pete. Listen, I'd like to say I was 90% on this, and he's going in with specific facts that altered to undermine me. And I feel I'm 90% sure. I definitely did not know that I did not know that they broke in to remove the wire, the bugs. Like, that's nuts.
Yeah.
I'd have been like, that. Like, even if they find the bugs, I'll just deny it. Like, what are you talking about? We had nothing to do with that. Like, going in back in.
Yeah, but they may have been like FBI issued.
Oh, like, could you imagine they had like serial numbers? Like, Johnny, you signed these out. Like, it's crazy. Well, we just have to kill Johnny. We have to stop that in its place. Johnny's gonna have a tragic accident. That's what I think. I'm not going back in. Anyway, I'm sorry. So
no, and so that was the whole point. The false narrative has been utilized in numerous different contexts. One of which, of course, was the drug war, which ultimately results in the situation we're in today, where a solution to a specific problem was, the drug war was appropriated as that solution. And today that context doesn't exist, but the machinery just keeps rolling on. And essentially what you have now is market forces dominating, which is why it's just, had they spent $1 trillion on demand, we wouldn't have a market.
Right.
But then we wouldn't have had the troops or the material or the weapons and munitions in Central America back in the 80s. And so, and, you know, it was interesting because, you know, in prison, I became well acquainted with a trafficker named Mario Villabona. And Mario at one point was the largest drug kingpin on the West Coast. He represented the Cali cartel in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we'd talk a little bit and he'd be like, you know, the problems that they made was doing business with people that the Americans perceived as communist sympathizers. Because from the Colombians' perspective, they just wanted to land their planes to refuel their aircraft. Well, it turns out that the individuals that are clear-cutting the forest to land the planes are insurgents.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the Americans were able to say, hey, look, the Colombians are indirectly financing the commies. So now they get bootstrapped in. So like they walked right into this trap. Like they weren't discerning enough. Because the last thing, you know, these guys were hyper-capitalists. They're not commies. They're just looking to land their aircraft. And so when I would talk to Mario, he's like, you know, that was one of the big things they did because they gave that issue to the Reagan administration. And that's essentially how they were able to say, now we're going to also go after the Colombians. And so you just had this massive escalation that served as a cover for what they were actually doing geopolitically. You know, and the problem they had is when Reagan went to the Congress, because at the time, both houses of Congress were controlled by the Democrats. So when they went to the Congress to try to obtain funding to fight the Nicaraguans, they said, no, like you just lost in Vietnam. We're not getting involved in any more of this silliness, which is what in turn prompts the Iran-Contra scandal, because now they had to raise the money to support the Contras against the Sandinistas. And so it's just one huge false narrative that unfortunately 4 decades later, we're still stuck living with.
Yeah, I would actually talk to Colby right now about the Iran-Contra scandal, but I'm afraid I get half of it wrong.
Does he know about it?
No, he doesn't know about it. He was educated down here in Florida with me. I don't know anything. I know bits and pieces. I watched a movie, which apparently I've watched several movies on these things, which were apparently completely botched.
Well, it wasn't until one of the break-in participants released his memoir. It was like in 1993.
Right.
That he disclosed, like for the first time, well, we were actually going back to get him.
Oh, so initially we thought you thought they were actually putting him in.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to know that? How am I supposed to know that?
But these are
The basic
big books that were popularized in the early 90s. Didn't you read it in 93?
No, the general consensus is they were going into bug.
Yes, they were actually going in to remove the bugs.
This is ridiculous.
Which is why the break-in happened in June of 72, because earlier that same month, the Supreme Court held that wiretapping is illegal. Because
I would think you didn't know that maybe this was wrong.
No,
maybe wiretapping your competition is
because remember, because their pretext was that the Democrats were directing the leaking of confidential information to harm the war effort.
So they were saying that this was part of an investigation?
Yeah, that was their pretext. This is an investigation to determine whether or not the Democrats are colluding with Ellsberg, which is why they broke into his office to look for evidence.
That sounds like it's all fabricated reason to bug them. What?
These are the guys that fabricated the drug war to smear blacks and anti-war lefties. And so, yeah, of course, obviously it was a false narrative. But nevertheless, that false narrative, the Supreme Court's decision caused them to be concerned that people were going to stumble upon something they couldn't find out.
Right.
Which earlier we were talking about what happened with Zambada's kid in Mexico. That's exactly what happened. When the Mexicans arrested Vicente Zambada, they stumbled onto something that nobody was supposed to know about.
Right.
And so when Zambada's like, what are you doing? I'm working with you.
Yeah.
What do you mean? You're not working with us. I'm up there meeting with the gringos.
So it's the problem. It's always like the fly. It's the fly in the ointment, right? It's that one thing you can't predict. Like you could not predict this. This kid's gone. He's gone his whole life without being bothered by these people, and he happens to walk out of a meeting with like the DEA and like the Americans. Walks out, and boom, they grab him. What? What's the going on?
He's like, yeah, call your commander. He'll call his commander and let him know, yeah, I'm here. I'm with the gringos.
Yeah, but I mean, how the chances that they would have grabbed him at all is unlikely.
It's such an unlikely, low probability event that all of a sudden now it was a mad scramble because you've got high-ranking DOJ, high-ranking DEA officials operating clandestinely in Mexico They're not even supposed to be in country. They didn't notify the host country. So now the Mexicans are saying, hey, you're colluding with these guys. You're in bed with them.
Which is true.
Well,
No.
we don't know the full nature of the relationship. Obviously.
I thought he was taking over for the lawyer that they'd cut loose.
Oh, no, yeah. But, from the cartel perspective, they're using the Americans to wipe out their enemies.
Well, yeah,
And
they're
from-
still providing information.
Well, sure, of course.
Yeah,
That's
to,
how-
to their benefit? Sure, to my
that's-
benefit. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's how, But from the American perspective, that's the last narrative they wanted. This is where you see, every once in a while, the curtain comes back.
Right.
And you see that there are events going on that were never designed to get out in public, that all of a sudden there's a mad scramble to cover up. It happened when we went into war with them. Okay, what's up?
Do you know where the term, they pulled back the curtain? Do you know where that?
I mean, I'm assuming like a stage, like a play.
Wizard of Oz.
Oh.
The Wizard of Oz. Right? Am I right? Yeah, they pulled you see the little man behind the curtain who's really working the levers, and he even says, he's like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But he's the guy who's really working the great Oz is this huge thing there. But it turns out that Toto pulls the curtain and it slides the curtain back, and you can see that it's really just this little old inventor working the things and talking into a mic, and it's it's a great So if you ever so hey so it pulled back the curtain. It's a great.
And so these clandestine operations, every once in a while, get stumbled upon.
He didn't care.
And that's an interesting example. And I think that's it. I think we're done, right?
So what's the solution? How do we fix it? How do we fix this country?
Pete doesn't have solutions. Pete only points out problems.
No,
That's
no,
why
the solution was already. It's obviously, like I said, make a deal with one of these guys.
I think that's a horrible solution.
Well,
I think
that's exactly what we did in Afghanistan.
I think what the solution is that you legalize some form of drugs across the board, maybe not everything, but some type of, and then you tax it, you make it purified, and then you have drug rehab centers. So if you want to be on drugs, you can be on drugs. If you want to get off drugs, you've got a free drug rehab centers.
Yeah,
and
that's a very optimal solution. Right. That's just politically untenable.
It's not that. But here's the thing: I'll bet that would cost less money than the war on drugs.
Which is why it's all a false narrative, because there is a now 12,000 FBI agent force, 13,000 DEA agent force, an entire prison infrastructure, an ability to, you don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole because you start coming off like a conspiracy theorist. But when you know that there are operations like this, you understand that, we live in a world where, up is down, black is white.
We need that wall. That's what we need.
Well, like I said, you build the wall, and how come the catapults?
Well, then we'll have Tesla robots manning the wall. Every 45 feet of a Tesla robot up there with with an AR-15.
Yeah, an autonomous weapon system.
Hey, you guys, if you like the video, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified of videos just like this. Also, do me a favor, please join our Patreon. It's $10 a month. You get Patreon exclusive content. It really helps Colby and I make these videos. Also, we're going to put the link in the description to Patreon. So please click go. It's $10. It really helps us. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you. See ya.